So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I'm the County Extension Director, as well as the Environmental Horticulture Extension Agent and Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator with UF-IFAS Extension, Nassau County. And I want to thank you for joining us for our quarterly Florida-friendly landscaping crash course program. So this program I do each quarter, and it kind of just dives into a little bit more details and discussion about the Florida-friendly landscaping program. So last quarter, we just talked all about the 9 principles. And today we're going to be talking all about Florida-friendly landscaping myths. So we have a lot of ideas and assumptions and understandings of what a Florida-friendly landscaping is, but there's a lot of myths and landscape management myths associated with the Florida-friendly landscaping program and beyond, just landscaping best management practices in general, that I want to make sure that we talk about and highlight as today's program, because when we're thinking about Florida-friendly landscaping and having our Florida-friendly landscapes, we want to make sure that we're not adhering to any common myths that we may see in the landscape. So at the end of today's program, you should be able to answer these questions. What is the Florida-friendly landscaping program? Because I want to make sure that we talk about that, of course. But then what are the common Florida-friendly landscaping myths? So first, let's jump into what a Florida-friendly landscape is. So Florida-friendly landscape, that is just more of our statewide best management practices for managing our landscapes, whether it be commercial, residential, institution, it doesn't matter. Anywhere where we're managing landscapes, we have those best management practices, and that is part of that Florida-friendly landscaping program. And of course, today's program is going to put a lot of emphasis, or is going to be purely about that residential landscape. But ultimately, that program comes back to having a diverse, a beautiful, attractive yard that's friendly to wildlife, it's environmentally responsible, and Florida-friendly landscapes also have the ability to be less work than a traditional Florida landscape. So it allows us to do what I say is enjoy your yard more and work less. The ultimate goals of the Florida-friendly landscaping program from a 30,000, 100,000 foot perspective is to just help conserve water, protect water quality, and enhance biodiversity. And as part of the Florida-friendly landscaping program, we do have 9 principles. And these 9 principles are right plant, right place, water efficiently, fertilize appropriately, mulch, attract wildlife, manage yard pests, recycle, reduce stormwater runoff, and protect the waterfront. I like this description that's on the slide. It says Florida-friendly landscaping is a collection of practices involving design, installation, operation, and maintenance, which are intended to reduce irrigation water use, protect water quality from overuse of fertilizer and pesticides, and reduce stormwater runoff. So I want to ask you all, before we get going, in this comment, it says design, installation, operation, and maintenance. A lot of times, a lot of us come into homes where we just have the maintenance. How many of you can just put in the chat box, had the ability to design and install and plan that landscape that you have in your landscape? You can put that in the chat box if you had the ability to make those decisions, or no, maybe someone made all those decisions for you. A great example is like new development, new homes. You kind of move into a landscape or a new house, and that's just the landscape you have. So sometimes thinking about Florida-friendly landscaping is it's best if we can somehow think about from that original design and all those steps and the thinking and understanding and planning and developing our landscapes, because that's where a lot of that decision making leads to us having the ability to maintain our yards, or makes that maintenance easier. But sometimes, like me, I moved into a new home. Every home that I moved into, I never had any say about the landscape. It just existed. So I had to deal with the landscape. So I had no input on that design, that installation, operation. Just mainly, I just had maintenance. So I was able to make changes, etc. But it does make it so much easier if we start off on the right foot. but that leads to a lot of things that we have to deal with in our yards. And a lot of those times when we're thinking about management and maintenance, that earlier decision making really helps it out a lot, makes that maintenance easier. But we get stuck with landscapes sometimes that may not be Florida friendly, but we're trying to figure out how to make those transitions. And that planning and designing and understanding of the Florida friendly landscaping program for your yard can really help benefit your home or your community. One of the things that it perpetuates though with a Florida friendly landscaping program are myths. So misunderstanding, misguidance, it could be related specifically with our practices or common landscaping snafus that we might see. So before we get going, we're going to talk about each one of these principles, but we're going to talk about some of the myths that exist with the Florida friendly landscaping program or sustainable best management practices. And I want you to go ahead in the chat box, take a second and write down what's a common myth that you associate with the Florida friendly landscaping program, or like people in your community may associate with the Florida friendly landscaping program. Go ahead and put those in the chat box. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. One myth that we hear might be that, a lot of people will remove a lot of their fallen leaves from their landscapes. They may think that's a good thing to do. I mean, I grew up bagging all the leaves from my yard, raking them up, taking them to we had a big composting facility where I grew up, but taking them there. But that's value. And that's one of the points that we'll talk about today. Are there any other myths that you all have heard or thought about with the Florida friendly landscaping program? As we go through these principles and we talk about some of the common myths, you'll probably start to think, oh, I know that I've heard that before, or I've seen this as an issue before within landscapes. So a lot of this will probably start to become familiar, but a lot of this is that we're going to do is address a lot of those common myths and just kind of talk about here's the myth, here's a little bit of that fact and information around that. So we'll start off with the first principle, right plant, right place. So right plant, right place, that is the first principle of the Florida friendly landscaping program. And one of the really nice things about the right plant, right place is this really thinks about that design and decision making for landscapes. If we match the plants to that have those preferred environmental conditions, if we're able to put those in those environmental conditions in our landscape and we can match them together, the environment and those plants in preferred landscapes, those plants will do so much better. Some plants like full sun, so we need to make sure that we put them in that full sun condition, or deep shade condition. So matching those plants, those environments that we're planting with, can really help our landscapes out to really allow them to be successful. Right plant, right place is the first step in that towards making that Florida friendly landscaping program. And when you start with right plant, right place, you're going to immediately have a much more stronger, resilient, and healthier landscape. So here's some of these common myths. So sometimes with Florida friendly landscaping, there's a myth that you can plant it and then you forget it. Another one is Florida friendly landscapes can be messy. They are messy. Florida friendly landscapes are native plants only. Tropical plants grow well here. They grow well. It never gets cold enough in Florida for some of our tropical plants. Well, North Florida, we learned that's wrong this year. So, and then also plants sold in stores are appropriate. So when we think about right plant, right place, these are some of these common things that we forget about or that we don't think about. So let's look at this fact that plant it and forget it. This is a misconception, a misunderstanding about Florida-friendly landscaping programs. When we follow right plant, right place, we create a landscape that does significantly reduce maintenance and maintenance requirements. There is no landscape that is 100% maintenance free outside of one you just letting go wild and natural and just letting be. So there is no such thing as a landscape that is that we can plan it and forget it. They still require maintenance, but that maintenance can be significantly reduced. And that really starts with that right plant, right place. So this is very important because we can see landscapes that suffer and die because of the ideas I followed right plant, right place, but then I never worked on establishing. I never looked at the general maintenance requirements or what might be required for those plants, and landscapes will go into decline or have gone into decline. Does that happen all the time? No. But nonetheless, it's important to know that this is a myth that that exists, but we try to communicate it that FFLs or Florida-friendly landscapes still require maintenance, but that right plant, right place will significantly reduce the maintenance compared to other traditional landscapes. Florida-friendly landscapes are messy. Have any of you ever heard this this myth before? You can put that in the chat box, yes or no. But I know that comes at common times. We're talking about, well, Florida-friendly landscapes are messy. And within extension, I've heard people say that. They said that to me. Florida-friendly landscapes are messy. No, Florida-friendly landscapes aren't messy. Think of it more of a maintenance guidelines rather than aesthetics. So Florida-friendly landscapes can exist to achieve nearly any landscape preference for our communities, our HOAs, whatever it might be, but ultimately you can make these Florida-friendly landscaping principles kind of meet any type of aesthetic maintenance management guidelines for your community. And it's just think of it more of maintenance practices rather than aesthetic preferences. So there are times that people have Florida-friendly landscapes, and I too will look at them and be like, yeah, not my preferred, does look a little messy, but that's more because of that specific landscape preference, not because it's a Florida-friendly landscape. So it's important that we characterize it and understand it's more of a maintenance guidelines, but of course, also, when you look at, you can get your yard and your landscape recognized as a Florida-friendly landscape, and part of that is saying that make sure that you're following guidelines and rules within your HOA, and make sure that it's people have the ability to understand that it's being maintained. So it's kind of a little bit of subjectivity in that recognition, but nonetheless, think of it more of a maintenance guideline. So Florida-friendly landscapes can be messy, but it's not because they're a Florida-friendly landscape. It's just that landscape is messy. So sometimes we'll have that comment that Florida-friendly landscapes are native plants only. No, that's not true. So with the Florida-friendly landscaping program, we follow right plant, right place. Native plants have an important role and can easily be the right plant for the right place, but it isn't a requirement. There are some situations where the landscapes can be so disturbed that's if we look at trying to put some of the native plants from that area in that landscape, that it can be very difficult to get them to establish. So we really look at right plant, right place, not native versus non-native. But nonetheless, if you as an individual are planning and designing and trying to create your own Florida-friendly landscape, absolutely you can create that goal that says, I want to have native plants only, 100%. But we, from the statewide perspective, we just look at right plant, right place. So native and non-native plants are totally appropriate, but we just want to make sure that we're still not using any of those invasive plant species. None of that are listed within the IFAS assessment page. None of that are even listed on like the FFL list, and obviously none of the noxious weeds that we have in the state, but you can't buy or sell those anyways. But nonetheless, it's not native plants only. It's just following right plant, right place. But I will always encourage homeowners, if you want to have that objective for your landscape, that it is native plants only, absolutely, but just still make sure that you're selecting the right native plant for the right place. Ooh, this is probably a sign that a lot of us in North Florida saw a lot. So that myth that tropical plants grow well here. We're in Florida. I moved to Florida and I thought, oh, tropical paradise when I was coming down to Florida 23 years ago. And once I got here, I realized, oh, because I moved to North Florida, it's like, it's all pine trees. Everything I was thinking was very tropical South Florida, because that's only really the imagery that I've ever seen online, and or not online, it's pre-internet really. Seeing TV or movies or books, or when I go visit my grandparents in Central South Florida, that's what my imagery was. But Florida, especially North Florida, we are zone 8A, sorry, 8B and zone 9A here in Nassau County. And if we actually look at that temperature range through that USDA hardiness zone when making plant selections, 8B, that average minimum low is 15 to 20 degrees, and 9A is 20 to 25 degrees. And this year, I think we had 24 to 36 hours below freezing in Nassau County. That was a long, probably even longer than that. If you know how long that was, put that in the chat box. It was like 3, 4, 5 days in a row that we just had really, really cold temperatures. But there was one time where we did 24 to 36 hours below freezing, and we lost a lot of plants. We lost a lot of plants in our landscapes, and that's just because we didn't follow right plant, right place. And no matter what you could do to help protect those plants, a lot of them succumbed to those cold temperatures because it still was just too cold for them to be successful. So we're seeing a lot of those plants that did have cold damage start to come back. They're happy, healthy, because some of them we can anticipate that to be the case, a lot of those perennial plants, etc. But we did see a lot of plants in Nassau County die because they just were not the right plant for the right place, because they were more tropical plants. That would be a 10A plant in South. So you probably think Central Florida South tropical zone. But because of our minimum cold temperatures, a lot of those plants don't work out very well. So we need to make sure when we're thinking about right plant, right place, we need to think about that hardiness zone. And here in Nassau County, we're predominantly 9A, but once you start getting Callahan and west, you're going to be in 8B. So it's a little bit cooler when you get a little bit inland. So a lot of your plants that follow that were selected right plant, right place that are 8B or 9A, depending on where you're living, those plants, if they're appropriate for that space, they probably did fine. Some of them probably still had some freeze damage or cold damage, but the plants are probably rebounding. They're happy, healthy. I have some plants like a ligustrum, which is surprising. It had some freeze damage, but it's recovering nicely. It's looking great, etc. So it's going to be totally fine in the landscape. So it's important to know that tropical plants, sometimes we have that thought that tropical plants grow well here, but we definitely get cold in North Florida. So we have to be very cognizant of what we're planting. Now, of course, I encourage any homeowner, if you're wanting to have any tropical plants, go for it. But understand that when we do have those cold temperatures, just keep in the back of your mind, that's going to be important for us to just be aware of if there's any extra steps that we need to take to help protect our plants. I usually like putting them in containers, or encourage putting them in containers, because you can move them inside and give them extra protection. But there's other strategies that you can do in your microclimate around your home to help protect some of those plants. And the last myth for the right plant, right place that we have is plants sold in stores are appropriate. No, there is a lot of invasive species that are sold in stores. Just because it's on the shelves does not mean it's an appropriate plant, let alone one that would be considered Florida friendly. So we see that in the state, only noxious weeds, and those are, if we look at state statute, it'll say what plants are considered noxious leaves. Those are the only ones that are illegal to buy, sell, or trade in the state of Florida. So we can go to the store and still find invasive species. And here are 2 images of 2 common invasive species that you can easily find at any big box store around your community. So the top one, that's Mexican petunia. There is a native Ruellia that looks very similar to that, but it's a little bit harder to find in stores. And then below that, that's that tuberous sword fern. And that spreads really aggressively. Both of those are invasive plants and they're sold at the store. So just because they're at the store does not mean they're appropriate plants, which can make it difficult. It can make it really difficult, especially if you go to the store and you're just looking for something to buy. You're like, oh, I like this plant. That due diligence just to take a few minutes, especially since we can have our phones on us to kind of quickly search, is this appropriate plant? It's worth trying out to double check before investing in something that could end up coming into our landscapes and causing a lot of havoc. So before we jump on to the second principle, does anybody think of any other maybe possible Florida-friendly landscaping myths that might be associated with that right plant, right place selections, or something that you might have seen as maybe possible errors that people have thought about? You can put that in the chat box. Yeah, that's a great one. That is thinking about landscape plant size. We do see that happen. Excuse me. We do see that happen quite often is individuals do not think potentially of what that size of a plant will end up being at its maturity. And it definitely has an impact on your landscape and landscape maintenance. I know a lot of you have probably heard me say it before that some of my pet peeves are large shrubs like a sweet viburnum that's right in front of a window because you constantly have to prune it. So understanding right plant, right place also includes thinking about how big or how large does a plant get and is it appropriate for the space that you need to put it in. Great. So next is principle number 2 is water efficiently. So watering efficiently, if we follow right plant, right place, we can see that landscapes establish and do well and can operate great with very minimal extra irrigation, and if we select plants that are drought tolerant, then we can even go further between watering events before any irrigation is needed. Because one of the reasons that we talk about watering efficiently is because 60% of residential water use in the state, and even we see that with some of our numbers in Northeast Florida, even more so in some context, but 60% of water bill for residential is for irrigation systems. That's a lot of water. And a lot of the issues that we see in our landscapes is associated to over irrigation and overconsumption. So thinking about watering efficiently to make sure that we're watering our landscape plants correctly can really help reduce our water in our watering needs and requirements for our landscapes, but can also help protect our landscapes because we have a lot of issues as a result of that overwatering and over irrigation. So some of the myths that perpetuate include irrigate often, but short durations. Trees establish in a couple weeks or 2 months sometimes. That'll be kind of the thought. And then the more water, the better. These are all myths. None of them are correct. And then obviously this image, it shows one of my landscaping pet peeves is you have a pop-up rotor that's just shooting that looks like a Nana holly. So that is a native, it's a cultivar of our native Yopon holly. And it looks like a pop-up rotor is just spraying it. So that water isn't going anywhere except to that plant. And let alone that holly plant is unbelievably drought tolerant. So there's actually seldom times that they actually need to be irrigated. And as well for our landscape beds, it's best to use low flow irrigation systems rather than pop-up rotors to make sure that we're using water as efficiently as possible. So let's talk about each one of those myths. Irrigate often, but in short durations. That's not correct. I see this happen a lot. Irrigation should be what we say is infrequent and deep. 1 inch of water can fill the top 12 inches of Florida's sandy soils. So, and then the roots for majority of all of our plant material is going to be within that top 6 to 9 inches of soil. So we must apply about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of water per event, whether it be through rain or irrigation, to make sure that we get water down to that root zone. Otherwise, rain may not make it to, or water may not make it to that root zone at all. So if we just do a bunch of short, frequent irrigation events, then what might end up happening is we could keep putting down a little bit of water, but it never makes it down to the root zone. So those plants are going to be drought stressed because they have no water. There's no water making it to those roots. I've had that happen numerous occasions in my extension career where people are like, I'm watering every single day in short spurts, but then their turf grass ends up going into decline, or their plant material goes into decline. And that's just because they keep putting that water out, but doesn't actually get to the roots. And then that top surface of the soil dries out very, 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 very quickly. So when we actually apply that 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of water, we're pushing water down to that 6 to 9 inch range of our soil profile. And even though the top uppermost portion of our soil dries out much quicker, we're going to see down in that 6 inches and below, it's going to take a much longer time for that soil to actually dry out. So there'll be a lot of moisture available for those plants. And that'll allow you to go a much longer period of time between watering or irrigation events. And another really nice thing about it is when we get that water down to that 6 to 9 inches of soil and you have that upper part start to dry out, those plants will recognize that that water's down there and they're going to grow and push their roots deeper into the soil, deeper down to grab that water. And what they're going to do, that those deeper roots are going to have a much stronger, healthier, more resilient plant, because it's going to force it to grow those roots downwards, and it can help with drought tolerance. It can help with that, allow it to go much longer at time to get moisture, to be able to uptake more moisture, uptake more nutrients in the soil, and it'll help leave for a healthier plant. So rather than those short, frequent irrigations events, we would rather prefer infrequent, deep irrigation. So we want that 1/2 inch to 3/4 inches of water per rain or water event or irrigation event. Actually, I'll come back to this one because I think it makes more sense to come to here. But we also have on the other hand of it is we might see the more water, the better. So when we put down too much water, a lot of water all of the time, that leads to a whole litany of other problems. So when we're doing short, frequent irrigation, our plants are just drought stressed. We're putting water down. It's not getting used. It's getting wasted. But when we're doing the more water, with the idea of the more water, the better, it's like, no, too much water. It's too much water. It's a waste. Too much water is a waste. It decreases plant health. It can have a less resilient landscapes. It invites fungus to come into the landscape. It stresses plants and encourages pests, and just all bad things. All bad things begin to happen, because what ends up happening is that soil just stays way too saturated for way too long, because the plants like to have that moisture available, but they don't want to be swimming in the moisture unless it's a plant that's their preference, like for right plant, right place. But nonetheless, so if we overwater, put too much water on, those roots will begin to rot. They start to they shrink. And especially if we look at something like turf grass, those roots will be nice and stunted. They will be very weak. They'll dry out very quickly. The turf grass stand goes into decline. And when that happens, your plants are going to start getting stressed. So fungal pathogens are going to come in. You're going to start having some more pests come into your plants because they're attracted to those stress plants. So what we need to do is you need to find a balance. You need to make sure you put enough water down infrequently, but you don't want to do too much water. The more water, the better is a myth. We need to make sure that we're putting down that infrequent, deep irrigation. Majority of our landscape issues I would attribute to this, is over irrigation and over watering, or just some type of watering issue. Make sure that you're doing infrequent, deep irrigation. Now, the Water Management District In Nassau County and across much of the state, you're restricted during the growing season. So right now to twice a week. Twice a week is the absolute max that you should be irrigating your landscapes. And in the winter, it's just once a week. And that's just because growth has slowed down, et cetera. Plants aren't actively growing. There's a lot of dormancy. So consumption is very, very low. So you don't want to over irrigate beyond the plant's needs. So then you're just wasting water. But in the summer, what we're trying to make sure is that twice a week, even through our recommendations, that maximum is too much. It's best if you completely turn off your irrigation system and only run it during periods of drought or when your plants are showing drought stress. Because twice a week, it works, but you can actually have healthier turf grass by just irrigating when your plant shows signs that they need irrigation, and you'll have a happier, healthier landscape stand. So going back to this other myth, we see a lot of times where there's a thought that trees can establish in a couple of weeks, or 2 months. I was talking to someone actually today that there's been times in the landscapes they put new trees in the landscape, they'll water them for 2 months, they'll take away the irrigation, and the tree dies because it's not established yet. So there's a lot of misunderstanding on how long it can actually take to establish a tree. So a tree decline can occur because establishment is not followed. For new landscapes, plant material establishes much quicker than trees. So when looking about that tree establishment phase, usually we want to, during the first 2 to 3 months, you're watering 2 to 3 times a week. This is minimum. And afterwards, you're going to water weekly until established. And then how much water puts down really depends on the size of the tree. So each time you water, you want to put down 2 to 3 gallons of water per inch of that tree caliber. So you just go up to about 4 feet high, 4.5 feet technically on the tree trunk, measure the diameter, and say it's a 1-inch tree, you only need to put 2 to 3 gallons of water down. If it's a 2-inch tree, you're going to put in 4 to 6 gallons. So usually for those younger trees, if you just put down like a 5-gallon bucket, that's totally fine. But it's important to know that we see a lot of tree decline occur because we do not follow that establishment. We follow establishment for a lot of the other landscape plants, but then once we go to reset, we'll start to, or go into that established landscape kind of irrigation, only irrigating when needed. We'll find that sometimes our trees can go into decline because they're not actually established yet. So now let's jump into fertilize appropriately. So always fertilize appropriately, soil tests. Start with a soil test. You can come to our office to do a free pH test, but you can also, we have soil testing labs that you can send your soil to get a full analysis. But following that, fertilize appropriately, that will make sure that we're putting nutrients down when the nutrients are needed and how much, because our landscapes, they may not need some regular nutrients, or some we need to follow just general best management practices, make sure nutrients are available. And understanding our soil will really help make sure that we do fertilize appropriately. So here are some common myths that we hear in the landscape. The more fertilizer, the better, as well as plants can be fertilized year-round. So let's jump into this a little bit more. So the more fertilizer, the better. No, a lot of you probably know that, but that's important. That how do we communicate that? If we're Master Gardener volunteers, if we're community members, how do we make sure that we communicate that with our neighbors, our community, to make sure that we are fertilizing appropriately? Because the more fertilizer does not mean the better. And here's an image from a green algal bloom in South Florida. And well, green algal blooms is associated with non-point source pollutants from nitrogen and phosphorus, but a lot of that comes from, we'll see it from residential landscapes, we'll see it from agriculture. So we're looking at all these different ways that we might see nitrogen and phosphorus get into our water bodies, and excess in nutrient application in residential landscapes is a major contributor. So we need to make sure that we're fertilizing appropriately to reduce pollutants, but also to put down only the nutrients that are needed when they're needed by the plants. Because excess of fertilizer usage wastes money because fertilizer is expensive, so why not put it down only when it's needed? It negatively impacts plant health because what it can do is if you put down a lot of nitrogen, it can encourage a lot of excess growth that can actually make the plants weaker. And then in turf grass, we look at excess of thatch development, which brings in your chinch bugs. So then you're stuck because then you have stressed plants. So it starts creating a domino effect. And then as well as excessive fertilizer use or inappropriate use contributes to non-point source pollutants. Because there are some plants that you can fertilize year round, but there's some that you need to do based off of a schedule because plants, sometimes people think plants can be fertilized year round. I saw plants in their dormancy getting fertilized. It's like, why are you fertilizing a plant in its dormancy? That's a lot of wasted money. That's a lot of nutrient loss. That's a lot of that is a lot of just pollutants that's making its way to its water body. Because actually I heard a number recently from one of our Orange County extension agents that mentioned $5 worth of misapplied fertilizer that ends up in our aquifer. Trying to make sure I don't misquote it. $5 worth of fertilizer that's misapplied that goes into our aquifer costs about $500 to remove. So think about that. That's a lot. That's a lot. So we need to really think about nutrient management, and all plants are different in their needs. So many plants, so that myth that plants will be fertilized year round. So when we think about North Florida, many of our plants go through periods of dormancy, especially in North Florida. Fertilizers should only be applied during that plant's active growing season. So follow IFAS recommendations for North Florida. You know, we're Nassau County. I know someone is from Central Florida, I believe I saw. So they have different recommendations for that Central Florida. You know, a great example is thinking about turf grass. North Florida, a lot of our turf grass species go dormant. So we're applying our nutrients and fertilizers following best management practices for turf from April through September. But if you live in South Florida, you can actually apply fertilizer almost year round because it doesn't go dormant. So they typically are recommending nutrient applications for some of those plants actually in the winter, just because it's not during the rainy season. So it's important that look for those recommendations, you know, especially for Nassau County, we're looking at those recommendations for North Florida. And for a few people that may not be from Nassau County, just making sure you're double checking those recommendations at your local county extension office. So we need to make sure that we're only applying those fertilizers when the plants need it during that ideal growing season. So that excess fertilizer, again, wastes money, negative impacts plant health, and it contributes to non-point source pollution. Our goal is to time nutrients, and that's what we have with a lot of our recommendations for nutrient management, is to time that application of nutrients at the quantity that we recommend, because we see that that uptake is very efficient. So there's very minimal loss at any if applied appropriately in a healthy landscape. So it's important to know that we can apply fertilizers year round. We don't want to. We want to time our nutrient application based off of the type of plant that we have. Some more myths associated with principle number 4 is mulch, or with the principle 4 mulch, we do have some myths. And mulch is an unbelievably valuable component of our landscape because it helps suppress weeds, it helps regulate soil temperature, it can break down and help build organic matter within our soils. It's great, it's wonderful, and it can look really nice too. So some of these myths that we have with this 4th principle is sometimes I'll hear people say, well, we don't want turf grass, mulch is better. Replacing turf grass with mulch, it's better. Just remove turf grass and put mulch down. That's a myth. We don't want to do that. As well as recycled rubber is a good mulch alternative, just because people will say, oh, it lasts a much longer period of time. You don't have to top dress it as much, etc. But no, we do not want recycled mulch. So let's jump a little bit more detail on these. So this principle, so the mulch myths that we have, replacing turf grass with mulch is better. No, it's not. So in fact, it's the open or mulch only areas in our landscape. Areas can be beneficial when we're thinking about circulation. How are we going to move? You need to have trails, paths, etc. Make sure that you're having places of egress and movement, especially in a landscape where you have a bunch of different plants. But if we have those areas that we just remove turf, because turf can be very valuable in the landscape, especially in our urbanizing areas, because when we remove a lot of that, we're providing the wildlife habitat. We're completely eliminating a lot of, not all, but we're eliminating a lot of space for wildlife to be able to exist and thrive. Those areas where we're starting to see decomposing mulch, there's no plant material there to help absorb them. So we actually can see some nutrient leaching occur, as well as there's no plants absorbing moisture. So you can actually see an increased flooding potential. Temperatures can actually rise. Soil erosion will increase because, again, you don't have plant material helping absorb it, as well as you can actually see a decline in poor air quality. So turf grass is a Florida-friendly landscape when a Florida-friendly landscaping plant, if it's the right plant in the right place. And sometimes it is not. And it's usually just because the environmental conditions aren't appropriate for it. So we look for those alternative plant materials that'll do well in those different environmental conditions. But in the situation where we're thinking about mulch, it's not appropriate to just remove areas and just have straight mulch. It won't be healthy for the environment, and it doesn't work well as a Florida-friendly landscape. So here's kind of an example of what I was talking about, just natural open area. It's best to have plant material in there. That's great leaf litter mulch, wonderful, but it's best to try to have some plant material in there to help control, to help with that nutrient uptake, help with the soil temperature, etc. All right, the next one would be recycled rubber mulch is good mulch alternative. So no, that's not correct. So a lot of the concerns that we do have with rubber mulch, like rubber mulch will be used in like playgrounds or other areas that have specific impact requirements. But it's important to know that sometimes those toxins can be leached into the soil. They're just create an excessive amounts of heat. It doesn't suppress weeds very well. It can actually heat the soil and cause a lot of plant stress, and it provides no benefit to plants. It provides no benefit to the soil. There's no benefit that really comes out of it at all. And so rubber mulch is not a Florida-friendly landscape approved mulch. Other non-approved mulches include like cypress mulch, or others might be like a cedar mulch. The mulch that we want to see in landscapes are typically going to be your pine byproducts, things that are chipped up because, storm-related damage, etc. But natural leaf litter, just the leaves that fall, just turning that into your mulch bed, that would be wonderful. So it's important to know that there are preferred mulch types and there's non-preferred mulch types. And rubber is one of those that sometimes people bring into a landscape, but do not do it. Principle number 5, attract wildlife. So we think about Florida and its urbanization. So we're seeing areas of land use change. So we need to think about the importance of biodiversity and supporting wildlife in our landscapes so we can have birds and pollinators be able to exist within these urbanizing areas, because these fragmented landscapes are pushing their habitats further and further and further apart. So our landscapes, or Florida-friendly landscapes, by attracting wildlife, we can help try to bridge the gaps between a lot of these natural areas with our landscapes, or we can just create a little microcosm, a little micro environment where we can see some smaller species just keep going through their life cycle on that property or on that site. So it's valuable to think about attracting wildlife. And some of the myths that we hear a lot of related to attracting wildlife include, if I attract wildlife, it means I'm attracting snakes, raccoons, possums, enter all those nuisance species. And then also I hear that just all snakes are aggressive and venomous or venomous. And that becomes a major barrier to why people may want to attract wildlife to their yards or the landscapes, because they don't want these to occur. So the first one, it attracts snakes, raccoons, and other problematic pests. Well, many of those nuisance species, they're already present within your landscape, whether you're trying to attract that wildlife or not. So attracting those beneficial organisms and wildlife can actually reduce, in some situations, those nuisance species those nuisance species incidences, it can reduce pesticide use, and as well as it can provide a healthier landscape. So when we think about the specifically reducing that pesticide use and providing a healthier landscape, is just thinking about providing habitat for birds. Birds come into the landscape, you're providing areas that's food and shelter, water availability to them, you're creating that habitat. Well, those birds are going to come in and they're going to munch and they're going to eat a lot of those landscape pests that you may have in your landscape. A great example, I was at someone's home. It was about a year and a half ago, and I just love this. We were standing by one of their shrubs, and they had whiteflies. Little whiteflies kind of popped up. And whitefly, if you're not familiar, is just a common landscape pest, but they can actually spread viruses and diseases. So what ends up happening is we're talking about the whiteflies, and then all of a sudden in comes a hummingbird. Yoink, eats a whitefly. Boink, gets another one. Yoink, gets another one. All of a sudden, he created an environment that can attract these hummingbirds, and these hummingbirds were all about these whiteflies, and they were gobbling them up. And no pesticide was needed for their management. And we see a lot of other things like that. So, bluebirds at our new extension office, shoo, we got some bluebirds, and I love seeing them with bugs in their mouth. So we can attract wildlife that can actually reduce pesticide use because we have these beneficial insects, these beneficial wildlife that's going to do all of that work for us, so we don't have to, or we don't have to pay someone to do it for us. Let Mother Nature take care of that by providing a space for Mother Nature to do its best. So, and that can encourage a healthier, more dynamic landscape because you're able to have an ecosystem or an environment that allows this wildlife to work for you rather than against you. So think about, a lot of these problematic wildlife that we're concerned about by attracting wildlife, well, they're already going to be there. So, when we start to think about this, we're going to try to bring, or attracting wildlife, we're bringing in those beneficials that'll help really manage a lot of the problems in our landscapes. I did have a question that came in that related to the last principle. It said, what is your opinion of gravel to replace turf? Is gravel landscaping beds Florida friendly? That's a very great question because we get that a lot. And actually, looking in the history of the Florida friendly landscaping program, the Florida friendly landscaping program it is held in a state statute. And the original or old wording that was in state statute said xeriscaping. And when we see that term xeriscaping, sometimes we might think of desert Southwest, gravel across the landscape because you don't have to water gravel, but that doesn't fit well with the Florida environment, the Florida ecosystem. And there's been a lot of homes throughout the state that say they're Florida friendly and they do put out just stone everywhere, but that's not Florida friendly. So the gravel as a turf reduction is gravel, we're going to start seeing, again, it'll heat up the soil. Essentially, it can heat up the soil. It's not going to do really well at suppressing any weeds because sand will get settled in there and the weeds start popping up all over the place. It has no benefit to wildlife or the environment. And actually, because of how much it heats up the soil, it can actually it kills a lot of that. It can kill a lot of the microinvertebrates and other things that are within our soil profile, and it can just completely sterilize the soil to a certain extent. So it can be it's very bad. So it's not considered a recommended practice for any type of gravel. So same thing with our landscaping beds. We don't get the benefits of using stone in our beds as mulch. It doesn't do well with helping retain soil moisture. It doesn't help with the moderating of soil temperatures. So it actually does the reverse of what mulch should be doing, and it can make it much harder for landscape management. Now, there are a couple situations where you can put stone maybe underneath the eave or drip line of your home, just when water falls down, it hits stone and gravel. And then also between the foundation of the home and you come out a little bit to that eave line, that allows kind of keep a lot of that biomass or organic matter from plants or some of our trees or our mulch away from the home. So it kind of eliminates a habitat for insects that could potentially work their way inside your home. So that's a great question, but usually when it comes to stone and gravel in our landscapes, it's not a good replacement for a mulch or turf grass. But of course, decorative rocks and stones that you want to bring in for pure just aesthetic purposes, that's totally fine. If you put a big boulder or a rock in your landscape to kind of create cool contrast, go for it. But as a replacement for turf or mulch, it's not recommended. Great question. That could have been a myth. I put it in here that I didn't, because that's a commonly asked question. All right, so going back to attracting wildlife, the next myth that we have is all snakes are aggressive and venomous. No, golly, this is not true. Most snakes around our homes are non-venomous. Now, of course, we'll still get venomous ones, but a lot of those non-venomous snakes are actually drawn towards homes because of food availability, like lizards, rats, mice. So, but of course, if you have homes that are adjacent to natural areas or in your more rural area, yeah, you're going to see venomous snakes, passing through your property, etc. Can they come in your house? On rare occasions, absolutely, but they're not wanting to be there. Usually, when we see snakes in our house or snakes do make their way into our home somehow, I usually like to say it's not the snake that you need to be worried about. It's what the snake followed into your home, which is usually going to be like a rat or a mouse, etc. So that is a misconception. Our snakes or snakes within our landscapes or our natural areas, they work their hardest to avoid us at all costs. So whenever we find them in our landscape, they're going to want to get away. They, even our venomous ones, it doesn't matter. They want to avoid you. I used to work in conditions where, yeah, there'd be coral snakes, eastern diamondbacks, water moccasins all over the place. You would see them, but they were like, hey, nice to see you, and they just kind of go on their way. So yes, we have venomous species, but they're not really aggressive. They're going to stay away from you. The only time that we see really aggression with any type of snake is just when we are the ones that are doing something. We're doing something that we shouldn't be doing, that makes them aggressive, where then they would want to snap and bite. But if we just leave them be, they go on their way. And actually having snakes around a property can be very, very beneficial because they are your pest control operators. They are happy hanging out. Usually you're going to see corn snakes. You might see rat snakes. They're going to be hanging out, chilling. They'll munch on the things, but they'll hide the rest of the time. They'll slither around the community or their area. But it's important to note that, yes, we do have snakes. We're in Florida, we have snakes, but they're not aggressive, and not all of them are venomous. So it's important to know that the benefits that we have of actually having snakes in our yard can be very good. But sometimes it can be hard to normalize having snakes in your landscape, but it's okay. And I guarantee you they're there. You just haven't seen them yet. But anyways, that's a myth. And they actually are very beneficial to have in a landscape, is because they're going to be managing a lot of those pests that you may have around your home. Speaking of managing pests, let's think about managing landscape pests responsibly. So this is really thinking about, we do have insects that come into our landscape. We do have diseases that come into our landscape, but how do we actually manage them? We don't want to just throw down a bunch of pesticides, insecticides, and just end up stuck in a loop, especially if we have the ability to manage our landscape pests in a way that's more natural, like having, lacewings, ear potato beetle, ladybugs, like we see in these images. They can manage a lot of those pests for us. So it's important with this principle number 6, managing landscape pests responsibly, is we're always going to have insects in our landscape. Majority of them are beneficial. Actually, almost all of them are beneficial or benign. It's only about maybe 1% of insects are considered pest species. So we follow integrated pest management, and we don't want to put down excessive pesticides and kill all of our beneficial insects just for the management of maybe 1% of the pest species, especially when those beneficial ones that we kill are the ones that may rebound a little bit slower. And then they're still being impacted by any pesticides that you put down. So these are some of my favorite little myths that I hear a lot about when people are thinking about pests within the landscapes. That includes grits control fire ants, moss and lichens, ivies kill trees, and Dawn dish soap is great for pest control. All these are myths. So let's talk about each one individually. Grits control fire ants. I don't know the thought process behind this. I wish I do. I've had a lot of people swear to me that it works. There's no science that supports it. There's nothing that says grits is effective. There's actually been studies that have looked at grits as fire ant control, and it all came back as like inconclusive. It doesn't work. So it's important to know that grits do not control fire ants. So if you like grits, like I do, don't put them on your fire ant hills. It's not going to help out at all. There are natural controls available for fire ant management. So some include like citrus oil or boiling water, but there is also other chemical applications that we can do. It's important to think that, you know, when we do have pest issues, when we think about integrated pest management, we think cultural control first. Can we just improve how we're managing it to prevent a problem from even persisting? So we think about cultural management, and then we think about, you know, I'm trying best to manage my plant, but we're still having an issue. Then we think about mechanical control. So if we have aphids on our plants, you can just smush them with your hand. But if mechanical controls, or like those hand pulling weeds is another mechanical control, that doesn't work. We think about biological controls, and biological controls is just having Mother Nature work for us. And then the last, if none of that works, then that's when we think about a direct intervention. And that's something when we think about chemical controls, some type of chemical application. So, you know, when we're thinking about pest management, we have to understand and identify what is the pest, what are the best ways to manage, to prevent, all the way to intervene. And it all starts with what is that pest, and identify it so we can figure out the best management practices. And grits are not an appropriate management for fire ants. I hear this a lot. This is the concern that sometimes moss, lichens, and ivies will kill trees and shrubs. In some situations, we can see the ivies, especially if they're invasive ones, smother and kill some of our plant material. But the true fact to this is, yes, invasive plant species will impact and can kill shrubs and trees. But moss, lichen, those native ivies, they do not harm the trees. Some of our vines that are very aggressive growing up into canopies of trees, the weight's not going to be a conflict with the plant material. There might be a decline of photosynthesis of a tree, but it's going to be very minimal. It's not going to impact the health. So what we're usually seeing in these situations is we're seeing plants that are opportunistic. So moss and lichen, they're being opportunistic. So essentially when we see a plant or a tree go into decline, that's when you actually see moss or lichen start to come into a tree. And then people will typically think, oh, I have moss, I have excess of lichen, my tree doesn't look healthy. It's because of the moss and lichen. It's like, no, it's opportunistic. So because of that thinning canopy that you can have in plants, you know, a declining plant material, all of a sudden you're creating an environment that is ideal for them to grow. So rather than looking for ways to remove the Spanish moss or lichen on our plants and our trees, we should rather say, how is this being managed? Because this plant is stressed to allow for this to grow very prolifically. How do I manage this plant to help make sure that it's happy and healthy? Look for what's causing that stress, because the moss and the lichen is typically like a red herring. It's just taking advantage of an unhealthy plant, but it doesn't cause any issues to those plants. The next is Dawn dish soap, using soapy water for pest control. No, don't do it. So I know there used to be a practice, a common practice. Is it effective on killing those insects? Technically, yes. But the big issue that we have, soaps such as Dawn dish soap or other common soaps, not just Dawn dish soap, that are not labeled for horticultural use, typically have higher salt content within them, which negatively impacts plant health, or it can lead to salt accumulation, etc. So you want to make sure that when you are buying pesticides or any type of control mechanisms that you're going to use in your landscape, make sure it's labeled for that use. The label is the law. What is listed on that label and how to apply it and where to apply it, how to store it, everything that's written on that label, that dictates 100% of its use. The label is the law. So if you have one pesticide, insecticide, that's great to use in your vegetable garden, but it's labeled for that vegetable garden, it's not going to be appropriate to use in your landscapes and shrubs unless it's labeled for the other parts of your landscapes and shrubs. So the label is the law with our pesticides and our insecticides, etc. And Dawn soaps or those other traditional, just like cleaning soaps, are non-appropriate because of that salt content. Now you can go get horticultural soaps and they're labeled appropriately, and that can be appropriate because they purposely do not put a lot of those salts in there. So just make sure that's important. Sometimes another thing that we will see that's important to note is, oh, I can't remember the mixture. It's like a mixture of like Epsom salt. Oh no, Dawn dish soap, Epsom soap. I can't remember it. If you know what I'm talking about, put that in the chat box because I can't remember the mix. Don't do that one. That's not appropriate either. So anyways, so we do see a lot of people, they will use the cleaning soaps, but no, any type of insecticide or pesticide that we do, make sure you're following the labels and it's labeled specifically to be used in that condition. All right, so recycle yard waste, principle number 7. So plants have the ability to retain all these nutrients in their leaves, their clippings, etc. And we can take that yard waste and we can turn it back into our landscape, because if we end up pushing a lot of that clippings, like you see in the images on these slides, so like excess of grass clippings, leaves that fall on the streets, or anything that ends up in our storm drains that breaks down, it releases the nutrients that can lead to algae blooms and fish kills. So it's best to kind of say, hey, rather than bagging up all my leaves and bagging up all this leaf material, it's best to recycle it back in the landscape, because anything that we bag up and we remove, those are nutrients, free nutrients that are lost from the landscape. You're removing them. So it is best to just mulch them up, compost. Use that leaf litter as your mulch bed. That works great. If you're in an HOA and you have some leaves, you know, it's best to use that natural leaf litter as your mulch. But if you have to have like a specific pine bark or pine straw mulch, then just put a thin layer on top of it. So it still looks like you're compliant, but you're still using the leaf material in your landscape. Or, you know, when you're mowing, just mow the leaves, let everything, just like use a mulching lawnmower, let it settle back down into the soil. It'll break down quickly and it'll recycle those nutrients right back to the plants. So some of the myths that we have with this, and, you know, especially we're thinking about composting. So one myth is compost smells and is unsightly. I don't want to compost because it's stinky. Or, you know, remove leaves and other plant material from, our yard and landscapes. So thinking about that first myth, compost smells, attracts insects. That's common concern or thought, but it's actually not the case. That does happen with compost. Don't get me wrong, that can happen with compost, but that's not appropriate for compost. That means there's actually a problem with your compost pile. So smelly compost and other common compost issues relate to material that's put into the compost bin that maybe shouldn't be in there at all. So usually these problems with regards to funk or insects and things getting inside of our compost usually relates to excess nitrogen. So there's some nitrogen sources that you put in there, we call them greens. There could be too much moisture. There's going to be a lack of oxygen, or you're going to include some things like meats and fats or eggs, because that is going to attract a lot of pests, problematic things to your compost bin. So eggshells are appropriate. Usually I recommend kind of rinsing to get some of the extra egg off, or you can chip it up really fine. And that's great. It's just more on the internal, like the yolk and the white, etc. So usually when we think about compost being stinky, it's related to just bad compost management that can be corrected. Now you can also use like vermicomposting, which is nice because then you got worms. Worm composting, they are doing the work for us, so you don't have to necessarily turn and your compost, and they kind of munch and create that compost for us. So, Great question. Should we keep leaf litter away from house foundation? Yes, I would still recommend try to keep, a little bit of a gap between the foundation and your mulch material. We don't want plants up on the buildings at all, because we don't want plants up on the buildings because we don't want the plants hitting the house, because that can impact the siding or hurt the siding of a house. We also want to encourage air circulation around the plants, so then we don't have fungal pathogens that can end up working in there, or moisture being held up against the house, which is a bad thing. But then also by having, if we don't want to necessarily have any of that leaf litter or that mulch material that we're using up against the foundation, especially if it starts to get too thick, because that creates a perfect habitat for a lot of our landscape pests, and we don't want them to work their way into our homes. So by keeping that little bit of a gap, that organic matter can really help out, because that can attract things like millipedes. I mean, really any insects, palmetto bugs, roaches. I mean, Florida, you name it, insects, they can get inside your house. So how big of a gap? Usually when we're like planting things, I usually think about like 18, 24 inches away from a home. But usually we're thinking about just like, I don't know if there's a rule of thumb. I don't know if there's a rule of thumb for how big that gap should get. I usually say about 4 to 6 inches at minimum. But usually, going back to what I was talking about earlier, that eave, if you have an eave, assuming it's not like a cantilevered roof, but that typical eave line, whether it could be 8 to 12 inches, keeping that space open is totally appropriate. So that could be a good rule of thumb gauge if you want. But I don't know if we have a set number. I'll look into that. But I usually just think about 4 to 6 inches, just making sure it's not up against the house. But that eave line is a great guide as well. Great question. So going back to what I mentioned earlier is, that myth of removing leaves and other plant material. I see people do it all the time, with Florida-friendly landscaping program. No, we don't want that. We want to think about recycling nutrients. We want to think recycling and bringing things back into the landscape, or keeping those nutrients in. So avoid removing any landscape material unless it is diseased. We don't want to keep diseased things on pride. Just bag them up, get them in the garbage or trash, don't compost them. Much of the material will break down in our landscape, and it provides nutrients to plant material and builds soil health, which can help then create a healthier landscape. So just keep and recycle, whether it be mulch within our landscape beds, or you're just mulching up with your lawnmower. Now, I will admit, if there's some trees that are just heavy producers of leaves and you got to figure out ways to get rid of them, yeah, I would then say that in certain situations, you can kind of just bag those up and try to get rid of them if you don't have the ability to compost, or maybe get them to somebody who can compost, get it recycled so they can go somewhere that can work its way back in a healthy way. So, especially for some of our trees, I call them like semi-evergreen, because they're constantly creating new leaves and they're constantly dropping leaves. Those are a semi-evergreen plant material. Next is principle number 8. So that's reducing stormwater runoff. So reducing stormwater runoff is we're thinking about any stormwater that occurs within our landscapes. How do we try to keep it on our property? How do we try to use it? All in a way to help with the efficiency of just protecting from stormwater runoff. So here's a good question. Referring to landscape material, I've heard that if you spray your lawn, you should not add those grass clippings to your garden or compost due to the chemicals. Is that true or a myth? That question is ish. So there are some specific herbicides that could end up in our plant material that, when added to a garden, it can kill those other plants. So it's really important to know what are you putting down, because it'll actually say where you can and cannot apply those in your landscapes. A great example is if I'm using composted manure, even from like cattle. If that cattle ate something that has an herbicide, it might not get processed by them completely, and it's in their manure. We'll take their manure, we can spread it on our landscape, and it can kill the plants in that landscape. So there's specific things listed on the label that will actually put limitations on how you can use those in the landscape. So typically when we're thinking about composting material, we should be fine with our composting plant material and compost beds, but I just want to take them and throw them exactly directly into like a vegetable garden. Now, if we're putting them into our landscape beds, that'll be fine, but vegetable garden, just make sure you know how that landscape is being treated in case there are any residual pesticides that could impact other plant material. And that also brings up another good point, kind of not necessarily a myth, but you know, there are some plants that are what we call allelopathic, and they actually have the ability to suppress a lot of plant growth. And if you get something like a pignut hickory, that can, I've seen people will bring pignut hickory leaves into their vegetable garden, and that will actually kill a lot of those plants in their vegetable garden because it's allelopathic properties. Almost think of it as a natural herbicide for controlling plants that want to grow up underneath its canopy. So it's important to, yes, that point that you mentioned is, I wouldn't necessarily add grass clippings right back to your vegetable garden because you're not 100% sure what's in it. But if you do know how it was treated, how it was managed, that label will say how it can be used. And typically it can be like 3 days after application, but there are some that can be like 30 days after application. So it really depends ultimately on what was applied. That'll can determine how long you may have to wait before you can use it. So usually for this grass clippings, just keep them in your yard. Keep grass clippings in the yard. Don't move them anywhere else. Just let them fall and just recycle in the soil right there. Wonderful question. So some of the myths that we hear, it's one of the big ones that we have with the stormwater is that we hear a lot, and we try to address a lot with the flora-friendly landscaping program, is stormwater runoff is treated before going to ponds, streams, creeks, etc. There is a misconception. Now, I think that in general, people are doing way better at this understanding than it was in the past. But there used to be the general assumption that all that stormwater is treated before it ends up in our lakes, ponds, or streams. That's not true. No, there's a lot of instances where I've actually seen stormwater drains, an inlet drain on a road. It runs 24 to 36 inches and then boop, right out into a stream, right out into a creek. And it's like, oh, cool. No, it's not cool. But anyway, so it's important to know that no, stormwater runoff is not treated. So no, stormwater goes directly to superficial water bodies without filtration, mostly. There are sometimes in big stormwater like pipes, etc., within urban areas. They actually have these really cool things that the water comes shooting in, it spins in a circle and it throws all the trash outwards and it gets caught in a big trash trap. But that's not 100%. It does help, but nonetheless, you know, when we're thinking about particulate filtration, no. So all excessive fertilizers, pesticides, misapplied irrigation, oils, gas, etc., anything goes directly down the drain, goes directly to the water. So it's important to know that anything that we see in our landscape, and it's important, I will encourage people, especially around hurricane season, is make sure your storm drains are clean and clear. You know, clean it up, get it out of the storm drain because you need water to move out pretty quickly, especially during those deluges. But stormwater ultimately does not get filtered. It's all those pollutants, everything it picks up right to our water bodies. Oh yeah, and washing paint. Oh gosh, don't wash paint in a storm drain. I've seen people do that. That's actually a violation, and you can actually get fined significantly by FDEP, so Florida Department of Environmental Protection, or some local counties who have enforcement opportunity. They will do that. But yeah, no washing paint stuff in your storm drains. That's a no-no, big no-no. So protect the waterfront, the last principle. So the last principle of the flora-friendly landscaping, protecting the waterfront, really puts an emphasis on, you know, that we say you want a 10-foot low to no maintenance buffer between water bodies and where that landscape is being managed, because then that buffer can absorb any excess nutrients, try to absorb any excess water to kind of keep our water bodies safe. So some of these myths, I always like to say, where do you live? But one of the myths that I have with this is, I I do not live along a water body, so this does not affect me. And the second one is Florida-friendly plants block the view of my water bodies. We're thinking about that 10-foot buffer. So jumping to each one. So here's a map. So when it says I do not live along waterfront, so this does not affect me, it's like, no, that's wrong. So this is just a very generalized watershed map of Florida. So it's important to know that every Floridian is directly connected to water bodies, is directly connected to water. We may not live directly on waterfront property, but our decisions impact Florida's natural resources, including water. So when we talk about protect the waterfront, yes, our Florida-friendly landscaping program talks about a 10-foot no to low maintenance buffer. But it's also important to note that no matter where you live, you're directly connected to water. And that's not just Florida. I know I said every Floridian, but everywhere you live, you're directly connected to water. And you could be miles from the closest water source, surficial water source, especially in Florida, but you may live in an area that we call a spring recharge zone. So the water just gets pushed directly down into our aquifer and can carry some of those excess pollutants. So it's important to know that everywhere we live in the state, we are directly connected to water, everywhere. And we do have our 10-foot no to low buffer, but this does affect everybody. So when we think about protecting the waterfront, it impacts every Floridian. The last myth for this principle 9 is I've had the discussion sometimes with individuals about, plants, and they say, well, the FFL plants block the view of the water bodies. I definitely get that understanding. Is I want to put plants down in my landscape, but I have this $1 million view. I don't want to put something down that's going to block it. Well, I definitely understand that, but that's not necessarily right either, because that is just the thought process of the wrong plant in the wrong place that leads to blocking waterfront views. So there's a lot of plants that we can think about that are low, ground covers, stay nice and low, that can be part of that 10-foot buffer that can enhance the view and not block it. So it's going to be important, going back to one topic I mentioned earlier, is knowing the mature plant size will minimize or eliminate these concerns. How big will a plant get, both in its width and height? And think about that mature height when you're doing that landscape plant decision making. Because if you don't want to block your view, put plants that stay nice and low. But we covered all the 9 principles, but I did want to talk about the biggest myth of all. The biggest myth of all that we all have to deal with. Here's a clue. So this doesn't really necessarily have to do it for a friendly landscaping program, but many of you probably already know what this clue means, is love bugs. That big myth that love bugs are a University of Florida experiment gone wrong. God, if that was the true story, that would just be a fascinating story. And the reason I brought this up is because I saw a love bug today, and we're right at that time. We're going to start coming out. So love bugs, the true story of love bugs, even though I love the myth, the true story of love bugs is actually just migrated along the Gulf Coast from Central America. We tracked them through Texas and Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, before they even got to Florida. So they just migrated along the way. And they actually have 2 breeding seasons. We have our April-May season, which we're starting to get into now. Of course, in Nassau County, we probably won't really see a pickup till May, and then August, September flight seasons. So we have those 2 times a year we have love bugs. Some years we just have thousands of them. And I think last year I was like, did I see any love bugs? I saw some, but it was just so minimal. So why did they become problematic? It's because, well, not necessarily problematic. They really don't cause any issues at all, except to our cars, but they're actually attracted to decomposing plant material. And they love hiding down in all that thatch or the decomposing material on the ground, and they just munch. They just eat, decompose, break it down. They're being awesome little decomposers. And then they flight as part of their mating season. And when plant material decompose, it has a fume, a smell to it. And we can actually see that same smell, I guess, with the love bugs, with that exhaust fumes from vehicles actually kind of like attract it. They kind of mix up the signals a little bit. And that heat that we see from roadways, parking lots, etc., where you have that high urban heat, you have vehicles hanging out, you're going to see actually way more love bugs than you may in some other areas. So that's the story of love bugs. Although it would be fun to kind of say that they're a University of Florida experiment gone wrong, it's not true, but it is always a fun thing to talk about. But anyways, so we talked a lot about other myths. Was this all of them? Absolutely not. All these landscaping myths, some with Florida friendly landscaping programs, some are just general landscaping myths in general. We talk through these myths, and it's important that we learn how to discuss these and talk about them. But also I want to make sure that we bring up some of the important resources that we have available to every homeowner across the state. You can go to our Florida Friendly Landscaping Program website. I like that. So the floridafriendlylandscaping.com you can go to, or you can go to the ffl.ifas.ufl.edu, or you can just go to Google and just type Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, and you'll pull up our webpage. And in our program, we have a bunch of different resources for residents. You're going to click on the big box that says FFL for home landscapes, because that's going to target you specifically, because we also have our community and landscaping professionals side of that webpage. And this year, we're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary of the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, which is really cool. And there are some really cool apps that we actually provide, and they're free. Yay. And one of them is, when thinking about right plant, right place, there's actually a plant selection guide where you can actually input all your environmental conditions, and it'll kind of give you some really great examples of plants that are readily available within the commercial industry. You can find, and there will be plants that will be the right plant for the right place. It takes a lot of that guesswork out. We also have a couple other apps, like a Florida Friendly Ordinance app, a fertilizer ordinance app, Florida Toxic Plants, which is kind of cool. I really like the Butterfly Gardens and the Bee Gardens app too, because you can actually start to build and select plants that are going to be specific for these butterfly or bee gardens. So it's more active in thinking of design decision making as well. But this app, you can scan this QR code and it'll take you straight to the page, or you can just Google Florida Friendly Landscaping Program apps, or just on your app store, you can just type in Florida Friendly Landscaping and you'll get these apps that all start to pop up. And you have the ability to get your yard recognized as a Florida Friendly landscape, where myself or Master Gardener volunteers, we can come to your property and we actually go through a little checklist to recognize if you are a Florida Friendly landscape. And it used to be just residential, but we now have commercial properties, we have new construction, and we even have communities where entire communities can get a Florida Friendly landscape designation or recognition, which is really cool. And on Saturdays here in Jacksonville at 11:30 a.m., Jacksonville WJCT, I can't remember what station it is, but we have the Flip My Florida Yard. Have any of you seen that? Put that in the chat box if you have or not, because that's a partnership between the Discovery Network, not to be confused with Discovery Channel, but Discovery Network, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and University of Florida IFAS Extension Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. And what we do is just think of it as like a home show where, we come in with landscaping professionals. There's a family that's super deserving, and then we flip their entire yard and we make it a Florida Friendly landscape, and they are really awesome. And last month at our 30th anniversary for the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, we got to watch the new the special episode that I think already aired for the Flip My Florida Yard. But anyways, you can go find this. It's played all over the state. But it's kind of a cool little show that allows you to kind of see a process of how do we learn about Florida Friendly landscaping programs, the decision making and design, and then we're flipping someone's house in it, which is really cool. So extension agents, wherever they film it, that county extension agent is in that episode. They'll talk about landscape management. They're working too. I was in an episode a couple of years ago, so it's a really fun thing. But you can watch us online. You can go to this webpage to see where it's airing. And I mentioned it before, but the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program is held in state statute. So deed restrictions, and I'll go through this part, but the deed restrictions, covenants, or local ordinances cannot prohibit implementation of Florida Friendly landscaping programs. And even like some in the context of HOA restrictions, is deed restriction covenants are in places to protect property values and often dictate specific plants from the FFL list that homeowners must use. So there are restrictions that exist within HOAs that are FFL, and you can actually write Florida-friendly language into those covenants and restrictions for HOAs, which is really, really nice. So in review, we had our 9 principles, and there's myths that exist with each one of these principles, or associated myths with landscape practices. But the biggest thing, going back to these 9 principles and thinking about the Florida-friendly landscaping program, is think right plant, right place. If I start with that proper decision making, I'll have a happier, healthier, more resilient landscape. So now, after we've gone full circle, you should be able to talk a little bit about what the Florida-friendly landscaping program is and some of the common FFL myths or landscaping myths that we have. So here is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. If you have any questions, the Master Gardener volunteers, follow us on Facebook. We have our YouTube channel, but feel free to reach out to us so we can help answer any of your questions that you may have with regards to problems, troubleshooting, landscape decisions, or if you need to talk about how do I implement Florida-friendly landscaping within my HOA. So feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. So I have a survey that I want to send to everybody. Let me get the link because I can't find it. One moment. Actually, I'll go back to that share because I realize it's my contact information. Okay. I'm going to put a link in the chat box. So if you have the ability to go ahead, you can fill that out in my follow-up email to everybody. It'll include that link. It's a 2-minute maybe evaluation. And we use these evaluations kind of learn about the impacts for overall programs, and we use that to reporting to our county as well as the state. So it's very valuable for us to get that. Very valuable. But I'll give you all a couple minutes, but feel free to answer any question, or sorry, ask any questions, and you can put those in the chat box.